What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto disbanded the council? If you enjoy then please like, share and do comments. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. Kill the demon. The shouts came as the 6-year-old boy ran for his life as the mob of angry villagers chased after him armed with various types of weapons and some threw stones at him. Go back to hell where you belong, you disgusting abomination. Another person yelled as he hurled another stone at the young blonde. 6-year-old Uzumaki Naruto was running for his life from a horde of angry villagers who were determined to end his young life. He didn't know why they were so hostile and hateful towards him. It was something he grew up with. Since as long as he could remember, the people had always hated him, sending him hateful glares and trying to hurt him. He had no idea who his parents were and spent the first 5 years of his life at an orphanage before the matrons kicked him out onto the streets of Konohagakure no Sato where he had been left to fend for himself. Life at the orphanage had been hellish. The matrons had ignored him and the other children either followed their example or just simply picked on him and stole whatever few possessions he managed to obtain for himself. The matrons just turned a blind eye to him and he discovered one day that they actually encouraged the other children to steal his belongings and hand them over to them so they could confiscate them. There is only so much a person can take before they lash out, and eventually, that's just what Naruto did. On the day he was kicked out of the orphanage, his 5th birthday, one of the children had attempted to steal a teddy bear that he had found lying in the dumpster behind the orphanage, and Naruto remembered how he fought back, lashing a punch at the boy's face and giving him a huge welt of a bruise on his left cheek. The matrons had intervened before the boy could retaliate, and not surprisingly, they blamed Naruto for it, and Naruto remembered how he verbally lashed out at them for siding with the boy who attempted to steal his bear, and he shot them a hate-filled glare, which caused the two women to back off, and Naruto clearly remembered the look of pure and absolute terror on their faces as they both stared at him like he was some kind of monster who was going to devour their flesh. After Naruto had calmed down, the two women had practically thrown him out. Literally, as they both lifted him up and threw him out onto the streets. Life of the streets was no better. The people immediately went after him with the intent to kill if they ever caught him. He was forced to life off scraps and leftovers that people threw out, and even resorted to stealing just to survive. However, eventually the Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, discovered him after a week of being on the streets and had fixed him up with his own apartment and gave him a weekly allowance so he could buy things. But most stores wouldn't let him in, and the few that did would overcharge him even for the most basic and useless of items. Some of the store owners would even raise their price if they discovered that he did indeed have enough money to pay for the item. They would overcharge him as usual, and if he had enough money they would demand even more just so he couldn't pay. 7 months ago, Naruto was in Konoha's general store waiting in line to be served after he decided to buy a new pen to replace the one the Sandaime had given him to mark his calendar. Already he could feel just about everyone else's eyes bearing on him with glares of absolute hate. Parents clutched onto their children, motioning them away from him like he was some kind of disease, and the children looked between him and their parents, confused as to why their parents were motioning them away from him. Stay away from him, Naruto heard a man whispering to his daughter. He's nothing but trouble and will only lead you to an early grave. But why, Daddy? The little girl asked, loud enough for the entire store to hear. He doesn't look bad. Just take my word for it, he'll end up killing you if you become friends with him, the girl's father replied in a slightly raised voice with a hardened, serious tone as he turned his head towards Naruto and shot him a nasty glare, causing Naruto to cringe as he walked up to counter as it was his turn to be served. He placed the red felt-tipped pen on the counter, and the store owner just looked down at it with a blank look on his face before looking up to glare at Naruto. Is this all? He asked in a nasty tone that would lead one to believe that he had been insulted. Naruto just nodded, trying his best to ignore the cruel man's glare as well as the glares of the people behind him and throughout the store. Yeah, that'll be all, sir, Naruto replied as he moved to fork out his money, which was in his pocket in a green frog-decorated wallet. He had been sure to bring a lot of money with him as he remembered the last time he had been here. The man had demanded 10 times the price for the last item he tried to buy. This time, he would surprise the man. This time, he would get what he wanted. That'll be 70,000 ryo, the man said, knowing that the pen only cost a mere 200 ryo, but not caring since it was the demon brat. Naruto pulled out the money and placed it on the counter and shot the store owner a huge foxy grin as if to say, "Ha, ha, I came prepared this time." "There, 70,000 ryo, just like you asked," he said in a triumphant and boastful tone. The store owner as well as everyone else in the store just looked at Naruto with gobsmacked looks. The store owner looked at Naruto and then at the money on the counter before his face twisted in pure and utter hate as he glared back at Naruto and felt his fists tighten at his sides. He was not going to let this demon spawn get the best of him. He was quite determined to ruin Naruto's plans and get him out of his store. "Did I say 70,000 ryo?" the man said with gritting teeth as he tried to calm himself down. "What I meant to say was 850,000 ryo." "What?" Naruto said in shock as the grin immediately vanished from his face. "That's not fair. You can't just change your price when I gave you the amount you asked for. This is my store and I can do whatever I want," the man said as he folded his arms and shot Naruto a sadistic, "What are you gonna do about it?" grin. "But I don't have that much," Naruto said in protest, shocked that the store owner had gotten one up on him. "Tough luck, freak," the man said in the same cruel boastful tone as before. "Now if there's nothing else, get the hell out of my store." Naruto just glared at the man who continued to look at him boastfully. "I'll get you for this," he muttered under his breath as the man unfolded his arms and moved to pick up the pen. However, before he could grab it, Naruto swiped it from the counter and then ran out of the store laughing as if he was the most carefree boy in the world. "Ha, ha, looks like I got the last laugh after all, old man," Naruto shouted back, leaving the store owner fuming and glaring at the doorway Naruto had exited from. "If you won't give me, I'll just take," Naruto's voice came from outside. "You insufferable vermin," the store owner screamed in rage, causing the children in the store to jump and hide behind their parents' bodies in fear at the raging store owner. "I'll make you pay for this if it's the last thing I'll ever do." "See what I mean?" the father from before said to his quivering daughter who was hugging his leg from behind, frightened that the store owner was going to hurt her. "Like I said, that boy's nothing but trouble." The man's daughter just nodded in agreement. Present, Naruto shivered as he remembered that. He had decided that if they would overcharge him prices that they know he couldn't afford, he'd just steal what he wanted. It got him into trouble with the Anbu, but he had gotten even with the store owner. Not only did he take the pen, but after the Anbu had returned it to the store, Naruto had let off a stink bomb in the store, which closed it down for a whole week. Luckily the Sandame had managed to get Naruto a replacement pen and the store owner was dealt with. However, the man's punishment only served to fuel the people's hatred of him. The beatings didn't stop and they only intensified after the store owner's execution. The Sandame, who predicted that the beatings and attempted killings would only increase, had assigned ninja to protect him, but some of the assigned ninja actually joined in with the villagers and those who didn't were usually distracted. It was a miracle that Naruto was still alive. When it came to the aftermath of the beatings, Naruto was admitted to hospital and the first time, the doctors and nurses refused to treat him and tossed him out. However, this prompted the Sandame to assign some Anbu guards. Guards that he trusted not to try and kill the boy to make sure that he received the proper treatment while he dealt with the ninja who participated in the villagers' beatings. The Anbu guards were former medical ninja before becoming Anbu, as they knew most of, if not all, the medical procedures, and so they would know if the doctors and nurses tried anything funny. Even Naruto's food was checked before being served to him in case the hospital staff tried to poison him. Naruto shut his eyes as he continued to run from the angry villagers. Why did they hate him so much? What was it that he could have possibly done that could have merited such hatred? He had no idea. Only the Sandame, the owner of the Ichiraku ramen stand, his daughter and an Anbu with a dog's mask seemed to like him, if not tolerate him. Naruto knew that no one else liked him. Even the ninja assigned to protect him who didn't participate in the beatings hated him and only stepped in to help because they feared the Sandame and what he would do to them if they went against his orders. They would intentionally allow themselves to become distracted to give an excuse why they didn't come to Naruto's aid whenever they could, and even though the Sandame suspected that they were doing so intentionally, he couldn't prove it. "Why can't you just die?" a woman shouted as she threw a cleaver at Naruto, which he managed to dodge by ducking without stopping. "Just rid us of your repulsive existence," a man called out, throwing a stone that Naruto veered clear of. Naruto continued to run as he dodged and veered from hurling projectiles. Why was this happening to him? All he did was decide to go out for a walk. Unfortunately, he just happened to stumble upon the village square where the festival celebrating the anniversary of the defeat of the dreaded Kyuubi no Yoko at the hands of the Yondaime Hokage. Unfortunately, the battle had cost the Yondaime his life. Today was the 10th of October. 6 years ago the Kyuubi no Yoko had attacked the village without reason or provocation. Many ninja had died before the Yondaime had come and defeated it. That was the story Naruto had heard. He witnessed the children in the ninja academy reenact that horrible night and even witnessed the burning of a huge effigy of the Kyuubi made of straw. It was then that someone had noticed him, and that was how the chase began. These guys are really serious this time, Naruto thought fearfully. They're really gonna kill me this time. Last year, he had spent the day curled up in the corner of an alley and missed the festival completely. This year, he hadn't been meaning to go to the festival, but during his walk he had heard the commotion and curiosity had gripped his interest. However, now it seemed that his curiosity would cost him. Man, whoever said curiosity killed the cat sure wasn't kiddin', Naruto thought as he continued to run, frantically searching for a way out. He knew that if he was caught this time, he would be dead. The hatred from the pursuing villagers seemed to have been greatly intensified. He had been beaten before, but the level of hatred had never been this bad before, and even at its average level Naruto knew that he would be lucky to survive. With the Sandaime and ninjas distracted due to the festival, Naruto knew that no one would be coming to his rescue this time. The Anbu were busy on patrol on the outskirts of the village, as the festival could be seen as the perfect opportunity for Konoha's enemies to attack the village. Most of the regular ninja were busy at the festival and the Sandaime was overseeing the whole thing. Even if he happened upon a ninja, Naruto doubted that the ninja would help him, and they had the perfect excuse. "Why do you hate me so much?" Naruto shouted back at his murderous pursuers. "What did I ever do to you? You know damn well what you did." Someone shouted back in a voice full of hate. "Don't act like you don't know," someone else called out. "It's a crime for you to exist." A third person hurled at him in agreement with the other two. Tears poured down his cheeks as he ran. He just couldn't understand it. The people hated him and he hadn't a clue as to why. It was like fate itself had deemed his existence a mistake even before he was born and was trying so desperately to rectify it. Not that Naruto ever believed in such a thing, but sometimes he wondered if perhaps there was at least some truth in fate. It wasn't fair though. Why was he so hated when others who had done wrong to others got off scot-free just because of everyone's hatred of him? It wasn't the first time that Naruto would awaken and find his apartment full of items that he did not recognize, and then the Anbu would come in and he would then know that items in his apartment were stolen. Apparently, the villagers' hatred of him had made him a convenient scapegoat for criminals, using everyone's hatred of him to commit crimes and then leave the evidence on his doorstep, and when it was discovered, everyone would immediately assume that it was him while the real criminals got away with it. Luckily the Sandaime had managed to get those incidents sorted and the real criminals always got theirs in the end, but that didn't sit too well with the villagers. After all, they saw those incidents as perfect opportunities to try and do away with him and were more than prepared to give those criminals a full pardon if it meant the demise of the demon brat. Anyway, Naruto suddenly turned to his right, noticing an alley. "You can't get away," someone called as the angry mob followed Naruto down the alley. However, the alley that Naruto had chosen to run down unfortunately led to a dead end, and the group of angry villagers had already blocked off his retreat. "We got ya now, demon," a man said as he hurled a really big stone at him. The stone missed and instead smashed a window that overlooked the alley and led into an abandoned building. If Naruto had been thinking rationally, he would have noticed the window and would have used it for his escape, but unfortunately, he was so gripped with fear at the fact that he had ran into a dead end that he failed to see the window. He was now facing the angry villagers and was walking backwards into the right corner of the alley. "Look like Erluck's finally run out, monster," a man said as he stepped out from the group and took the front as the mob advanced on him. "This time, no one's here to save ya this time." Naruto studied the man as he looked up at him with eyes full of fear. The man was an average-sized man with a slight muscular build with short black hair that looked as if it was starting to go gray, and he also had sharp cold brown eyes and oozed out rage and hate as he looked down at Naruto despite the smirk on his face. He wore the usual blue sandals that mostly everyone wore, dirty-looking green trousers, a white shirt that looked as if it had been lying in a mud puddle for a while, and a black sleeveless waistcoat. It was his eyes that frightened Naruto the most. They spoke volumes of how he truly felt about the boy quivering before him. "What are y'all gonna do now, huh?" The man taunted cruelly as Naruto backed up into the corner as he continued to bore a hole in him with his rage-filled glare. "Y'all should have never come out on this day, monster, because today is the day life gets snuffed out." With nowhere left to run, Naruto fell to the ground and curled up into a ball as if in some vain effort to protect himself. "Just leave me alone," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Huh, I didn't quite catch that," the man said in a cruel tone as he raised his hand to the side of his ear as if trying to amplify his hearing. "I said leave me alone," Naruto snapped as he looked up at the man, who was now ahead of the rest of the mob and just a few inches from him. "Leave you alone," the man said as his expression and tone became more serious before closing his eyes for a brief moment. His face then twisted to one of absolute pure rage as he covered the last few inches and then bent down and grabbed Naruto by the scruff of his neck. "Leave you alone," the man repeated in a loud voice, his tone full of fury, anger and hate. "Like hell I'm gonna leave you alone, you walking abomination. We're gonna rectify a mistake that should have been rectified 6 years ago. Da one responsible for Ma brother's execution 7 months ago." However, Naruto wasn't listening. He was busy frantically looking and feeling around with his hands for anything he could use to get this brute of a man to unhand him. "Y'all remember Ma brother, don't y'all?" the man went on in a cruel, uncaring tone, either not noticing or didn't care if Naruto was listening to him or not. "Ran da general store that y'all stole a pen from? Yeah, I remember that. Ma brother got executed cause of that, and why? Because y'all somehow bewitched da Hokage into being attack dog. Now it's time to pay da piper." He then released Naruto and reached into his waistcoat and pulled out a knife that he had hidden underneath. "Yes, kill it, kill the demon." The rest of the mob shouted as they cheered the man on, raising their arms into the air in an encouraging way. The man turned to look at the crowd and gave them a smile before nodding. However, just as he turned to face the crowd, Naruto's right hand just happened to come across a broken shard of glass that had fallen from the smashed window and had somehow fallen outside instead of inside the building. When the man turned back to face Naruto, Naruto noticed the knife in the man's hand and panic soon took over, so much so that he had no idea what happened next. "I said leave me alone," he shouted in a panicked tone as he tightened his hold on the glass shard, not caring that it was cutting into his skin, and before anyone knew what was happening, Naruto quickly took the shard in his hand and thrust it into the man's throat. The man's eyes widened in shock and in fear as he felt the sharp object pierce his jugular. He opened his mouth to speak, but coughed up blood instead before backing off a few feet, still coughing up blood and splutters, and then dropped to the ground dead with the shard still lodged in his throat. No one spoke as the crowd watched the one that was going to rid them of the demon spawn drop to the ground dead. His eyes were wide open and full of shock. No one thought that this would happen. No one thought that the demon would retaliate. In the past, Naruto would just curl up into a ball and take his abuse until the ninjas came to save him. He had never lashed out before, and now that he had, the crowd that had been cheering the man on as they demanded his blood be spilled were not sure what to think. What did this mean for them? Were they in danger? It was then that Naruto's brain finally caught up with him and his eyes widened in shock as they fell upon the dead body of the man who was about to kill him a few moments ago. Even he had no idea what happened, though seeing the shard of glass he remembered having in his hand before his mind went blank now lodged in the dead man's throat told him that he had been responsible for it. He had killed the man. He looked at the rest of the crowd who were still shocked at what they had witnessed. What? He tried to say, but the rest of his words left him before they could leave his mouth. This stutter immediately got the crowd's attention and they suddenly felt fear take root in their hearts. What was the demon going to do now that it had killed one of them? Their good mood and their rage had all been washed away by the fear that now had established dominance within them. They watched as Naruto picked himself up and looked towards the crowd, as if looking for answers as to what just happened. What? He said as he took a step towards the crowd. The crowd suddenly screamed as they looked at Naruto with sheer terror in their eyes. The look that Naruto remembered the 2 orphanage matrons having when he lashed out at them, and that terrified him. He knew that he had killed the man despite not remembering doing it, and it now looked as if the crowd that had been so determined to kill him moments ago were now backing off like frightened rabbits. Just what was it about him that scared the people so much? He took another step towards the crowd and someone suddenly screamed and turned to run away. This prompted the rest of the crowd to do the same. It's finally showing its true colors, a woman screamed. Its power must have been restored, a man shouted, desperate to get away from Naruto as he pulled his fellow villagers back in an effort to get out of the alley and away from Naruto as quickly as possible. I don't want to die, a teenager shouted, running as fast as he could, shoving those in front of him out of his way as he, like the man who claimed that the demon's power had been restored, he was trying to get away from Naruto as quickly as possible. What had started out as a group effort to kill the demon had now turned into an every man for himself scrambled to get away from it. The woman walked down the street as she followed the crowd of angry villagers with a confident smirk framing her face. She could hardly believe that the demon had actually shown up at the festival, prompting the villagers' anger. She had been the one who had ranted him out. In fact, she had been watching the demon for quite some time, ever since he had been thrown out the orphanage. She had instigated most of the major beatings the boy suffered throughout his life, though she never really participated in any of them. No sense in risking getting caught, especially when she had a child to support. To her, the demon boy was the bane of her very existence. He contained the Kyuubi no Yoko, her husband's killer, and yet, she had come to see that he was just indeed a boy who was clueless about the burden he carried. An innocent who was just as much a victim of the Kyuubi's attack as anyone else. However, that didn't stop her from hating him, and it infuriated her the more she thought about it. If only those foolish villagers knew, if they did, they'd realize that Kyuubi was only part of the reason she hated the boy, and she wondered if they'd be so quick to try and kill him, especially if they knew the Yondaime's last wish. She let out a small chuckle thinking about it. Maybe some of the villagers would still hate him if they knew. After all, throughout history, she had come to learn that people were ignorant, and it felt like they would only feel better so long as anyone and they didn't care who it was, got punished. Revenge was a sick and twisted force to exist. If the person who wronged you had already died before you could enact your revenge, or you couldn't take your revenge for whatever other reason, then you would go for the next best thing. That's what the villagers were doing. They couldn't enact their revenge on the Kyuubi, so they used Naruto, the Kyuubi's container, as a perfect substitute. What a fool you were, Minato-kun, she said to herself, emphasizing the kun suffix in a mocking tone. You should have realized that these fools would never see that piece of disgusting trash as a hero. Your lack of foresight is really amusing to the point where it's almost laughable. You really don't understand human nature all that well. They don't understand the situation, and history has shown that humans fear what they don't understand. She then looked up at the night sky with a boastful, almost taunting look on her face. The villagers were foolish and fearful, and their fear made them easy to manipulate. They were mere pawns to her. She had instigated many of the attacks on Naruto, but not all. She kept her distance and would always leave whenever the Anbu or ninja showed up. No one under that foolish old man's payroll suspected a thing. The attacks she instigated were set up to make it look like random opportunistic moments, and none of those caught spilled the beans. After all, who would suspect someone operating behind the scenes when the reason for attacking him was plainly obvious? Many villagers lost loved one at the hands of the Kyuubi, and they, in their hatred, blindly took it out on the beast's container. Even if the Anbu knew that the attacks were coordinated, they would never suspect that the mastermind would remain at a distance, and would foolishly believe that the mastermind would be among those participating. After all, who didn't want a piece of the demon that almost destroyed their villager and killed their loved ones? The woman was smart. She learned to exercise patience through her experiences. As a retired ninja who attained the rank of Jonin before parenthood and her husband's death forced her retirement, she knew patience and stealth as well as utilizing the tools at her disposal. Only in this case her tools happened to be the villagers, and in their desire to get rid of the demon, not one of them suspected that the woman was using them and disposing of them via the legal system, which was totally oblivious to her scheme. Why dispose of useless pawns yourself when there were others to do it for you? It's gonna kill us, a voice came, catching the woman's attention as she looked in front of her. She saw the people in the crowd that had chased after the demon brat running out from an alley with terrified looks on their faces as they scattered in all directions. She may not have seen everyone who was in the crowd, But she recognized enough of them to know that it was the same crowd she had ranted Naruto out to, and it looked as if they were fleeing from him now. A mixture of panic and curiosity flowed through her as she suddenly burst into a run to see what was happening. She was fearful that perhaps the boy had unconsciously tapped into the Kyuubi's monstrous chakra and had scared them off. However, she hadn't seen any signs that that had indeed happened, which was why she was curious. She could distinctly remember the Kyuubi's chakra and what it felt like despite not having felt it in 6 years. She remembered how frightful and horrifying it felt. To describe it plainly, it was like the killing intent of a million Jonin all staring at her with the intent of ending her life, and she had been nowhere near the bottleful that night since she had been busy taking care of her 6-month-old baby. In all her years plotting the Kyuubi container's destruction, she had always had this underlying fear that he would tap into the monster's chakra and use it to defend himself. After all, he was only human and humans could only take so much before being overwhelmed, and it would be an opportunity like that the Kyuubi would capitalize on to break free to finish what had started or at the very least use Naruto's body to that end. She had always been careful in the past. She had made sure that the ninja guarding him who allowed themselves to be distracted weren't distracted too long for fear of the Kyuubi's influence. No matter how much she wanted Naruto dead, she always feared Kyuubi's influence. However, as she reached the alley and took a cautious step into the alley, she was relieved to see Naruto on his knees looking down at the ground, apparently in shock as a dead body of a man lay in front of him with a shard of glass lodged in his throat. Those fools really are so pathetic and foolish it's laughable, she thought with a snort. He gets lucky and kills one of his attackers with a glass shard and they all scatter like frightened rabbits. Cowards, the whole lot of him. It's not like he summoned its chakra, and yet from their reactions, one would think that he would have done. Guess fear really does make one foolish. She then looked down at Naruto, who looked depressed and dispirited as he just stared down at the ground, not moving a muscle before letting out a cruel sneer of contempt, which did nothing to alert the boy to her presence. He just sat there on his knees looking down at the ground and completely oblivious to his surroundings. He didn't acknowledge the woman's presence, nor did he show that he was aware that she was there. The woman just glared down at him with nothing but contempt and revulsion, the container of her husband's killer, and she really didn't want to think about it, and the edges of her lips suddenly curled into a cruel smirk as she contemplated on how easy it would be just to end the pathetic boy's life. With mostly everyone's attention at the festival, she could do it and get away with it. If some passing villagers found him later, they'd probably dispose of the body, and even if an Anbu or regular ninja found the body and reported it to the Hokage, there was no way it would be traced back to her unless the old coot was willing to execute the village's entire population, which she knew was impossible. However, she felt that killing him here and now would be too easy, not to mention the Sandame and a few ninjas would mourn the loss of the demon, while the rest of the village celebrated its death, and no doubt, the old codger would make life difficult for the village in the coming years as a form of punishment since she knew how fond he was of the boy. She shook her head as she briefly closed her eyes, content with what she had planned. No, she wouldn't kill him, yet. What's wrong, boy? Why are you just kneeling there? She asked in a tone of fake sympathy as if oblivious to the dead body between her and Naruto. I killed someone. Naruto choked out in a heartbroken tone, not once looking up from the ground. You killed someone? The woman said in fake shock as she placed her hands over her open mouth despite the fact that Naruto wasn't looking up at her. Why would you do that? I don't know, Naruto replied, spluttering out his words as his voice became more broken. Everyone hate me and I don't know why. I remember the man CCC coming at me and then the next thing I remember. He's dead with a shard of GG glass in his throat, and I remember G grabbing a shard of glass before my mind went blank. The woman listened carefully as she listened to Naruto, closing her eyes and nodding after he finished. I see, so this village hates you and you have no idea why? She asked in a steady tone. Naruto said, nodding his head, though he still didn't look up at the woman. There was a brief silence as the woman pondered her next course of action. Well then, she finally said after a few minutes or so, it seems to you like they hate you for no valid reason, though I'm sure they do have their reasons, but if they won't give you a straight answer, then hate them back. Reward hatred with hatred. If they attack you, then fight back. Kill more of them. Make them pay for what they did to you. Strike fear in their very souls. Kill anyone you see if it helps. If they see you as a monster, then become one. Show them what a monster can do. Destroy this village if it makes you feel better. Do whatever it takes to make this entire village suffer for what you've suffered. She then turned and walked away, leaving Naruto still staring at the ground with wide eyes as he heard what she had said. The woman had an evil smirk on her face as she retraced her steps back to the village square as she thought about her plan. Yes, that's right. Become just as much of a monster as the one sealed away in you, she thought with an evil laugh. It'll give me the perfect excuse to kill you later on without worrying about consequences, as even the Hokage and his merry band of followers will turn against you and all my troubles will finally be laid to rest. Naruto looked up after a few moments of thinking about what the woman had told him, only to find that she wasn't there. She had already gone and Naruto felt his depression return. He had not long just killed someone who was going to kill him, and even though he had no memory of doing it, he knew that he had been the one that ended the man's life. Well, the bright side was that he had scared off the rest of his attackers who had seemed to flee as if he had become some kind of crazed psychopath who was going to kill him, and yet, the fact that killing the man scared off the rest of the crowd who were out for his blood did little, if anything, to brighten his mood. Hate them back, the woman's voice echoed in his head, reward hatred with hatred. If they attack you, fight back. Kill more of them. Make them pay for what they did to you. Strike fear into their very souls. Kill anyone you see if it helps. If they see you as a monster, then become one. Show them what a monster can do. Destroy this village if it makes you feel better. Do whatever it takes to make this village suffer for what you've suffered. Those words bounced about his head as he looked at the still body of the man he had killed. He didn't know what to feel anymore. At first, when he realized what he'd done, he felt absolutely terrible. He really couldn't find the words to accurately describe how he felt, but it left him feeling dispirited, dejected and depressed. He honestly didn't know what to feel other than raw emptiness, like he was falling into a bottomless pit of never-ending darkness with no lifeline to escape. He honestly couldn't believe he'd done such a thing, and the very thought that he had frightened him to no end. However, then this mysterious woman had shown up and basically told him not to let it bother him, but to suck it up and kill more people if they tried to beat him again. That had been the woman's underlying message. Sure, Naruto could admit to himself that he hated the villagers. He already knew how to reward hatred with hatred. They hated him and they wouldn't give him a valid reason as to why, leading him to wonder if he had been born to be hated by the world, and he had decided that if they were going to hate him, then he'd just return that feeling. However, when it came to acting on his hatred, Naruto always made those who wronged him pay through pranks, like that time he let off a stink bomb in the village's general store because he couldn't get a pen he wanted, and when he stole it, the Anbu came and took it off him and returned it. In retaliation, he planted a stink bomb in the store and let it off, which caused the store to be closed down for a whole week, though the owner never got the opportunity to return as the Sandaime had him executed for his mistreatment of Naruto. However, Naruto wondered if he could really go higher and kill those who sought to hurt him. The man he'd killed had been the former store owner's brother, and it was obvious that he was upset that his brother was gone and blamed Naruto and sought to kill him for it. Could he do something similar? Could he seek to kill those who wronged him? Pranks were pranks, and they didn't seem to be effective in making the people's hatred of him go away. In fact, his pranks seemed to make it worse, and Naruto wanted desperately more than anything to make the villagers' hatred of him go away. Could killing them and striking fear into their hearts be the way to go? He had to admit, it was tempting, but it didn't make the guilt over the man's death or the dejection, depression and dispirited feelings that accompanied it go away. Could he really live with himself if he killed more villagers? He clenched his eyes shut and violently shook his head and thrashed about as he clenched his fists and brought them to the sides of his head. This is all so confusing, he thought, still on his knees. I hate this. I don't know what to do. He felt as if there were two sides of himself that were currently at war with one another. Like he had an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other, arguing over whether Naruto should take up the woman's advice. Naruto had to admit that if the crowd's reaction to killing the man was anything to go by, then killing the next person who decided to try and kill him and the person after that and so on would probably get the villagers to leave him alone. However, on the other hand, could he really bring himself to do it? Could he become a monster and kill without remorse and take pleasure in making everyone suffer for what he suffered? The man suffered the loss of his brother and wanted to make him suffer. However, Naruto had a growing fear that if he did do what the woman told him to, he'd end up regretting it later on and things would only end up worse. He didn't know why he felt that way. Maybe it was the fact that he was ashamed and frightened that he'd killed the man, and as tempted as Naruto was to follow the woman's words, it didn't lessen nor change his feelings towards the man's death. "Naruto?" A voice came, causing Naruto to come out of his mind's inner struggle and look up. Standing in front of him and looking down at the body was a man with whitish silver hair wearing a gray dog mask with black covers over the eye holes, though with tiny holes and thin material making it easy for him to see, a tight black sleeveless shirt with gray armor over it strapped over his shoulders and appeared to have a zipper running down the center at the front. He also wore black gloves that ran up most of the length of his arms with gray arm guards over the top up to the elbow. Standard shinobi trousers with bandages wrapped round his right thigh near the top that helped hold his kunai and shuriken holster in place, and the regular shinobi sandals along with bandages that ran from his ankles up to halfway between his knees and ankle, giving his trousers a somewhat baggy look where they met the bandages, and he had a ninjutsu strapped to his back and a black spiral tattoo on his left shoulder that looked like a curved wavy line and an upside-down question mark minus the dot that curled when the line started to curve. "Naruto, what happened here?" the man asked. The look down at the man's body and seeing the glass shard lodged in his throat, he could pretty much guess what had happened, or at the very least, Naruto had killed the man. "I Inu-san," Naruto said as his eyes widened in fear at the man's presence. I didn't mean to." Fear now overwhelmed all other emotions from within Naruto. This man, code-named Inu, was one of the 4 people who Naruto could honestly say liked or at least tolerated him. He was an Anbu whom Naruto had come pretty close to throughout his life. Inu had been the one who would mostly come to his rescue from the villagers whenever he suffered beatings. He was the one who caused the ninjas assigned to protect him, who were intentionally allowing themselves to be distracted to get on with their jobs instead of indulging in whatever they were doing. Inu had saved Naruto's life more times than even the Sandaime cared to count. In truth, Naruto looked to Inu as a savior and an idol next to his number 1 hero, the Yondaime Hokage. However, now that Inu was here, what would happen now? Naruto knew that Inu had already put 2 and 2 together and deduced that he was the one responsible for the man's death, and it scared him. He feared that his idol would turn on him, since he always had a small fear that he was on the villager's side and was only looking out for him because of orders from the Sandaime, and was biding his time, waiting for the opportunity to do away with him to present itself, and well, Naruto saw that this was as good an opportunity as any. "Inu-san, PP please," he pleaded as he stared up at the masked man with horror written all over his face. "I didn't mean to." He was CC coming at me with a knife, and I don't know what happened after that. Naruto felt really pathetic at the moment. As truthful as his explanation was, he knew that if Inu was secretly on side with the villagers, then it wouldn't matter. Inu would either kill him right here and now, or find a way to get the Sandaime to side with the villagers and make him look even worse than the people already believed him to be. He hated that he was so hated in the village for no apparent reason other than the fact that he was simply alive. He remembered some of the villagers screaming how his very existence was a crime against humanity, and for a moment, the woman's advice that he should start killing those who hurt him suddenly became a bit more tempting. However, Inu looked down at Naruto and stared into his eyes for a moment and saw the fear and uncertainty in them. He then walked over to Naruto and knelt down on one knee and placed his right hand on top of Naruto's head. "Naruto, it's okay," he said in a comforting tone as he wrapped his left around the boy's waist, pulling him closer to him. "I'm sure that you were only defending yourself." But I killed someone," Naruto said in a raised voice, surprised that Inu said such a thing and still on guard in case he was trying to lull him into a false sense of security so he could double-cross him. Inu sighed as his head dropped to look at the ground. He then brought his head back up to look at Naruto straight in the eyes before he placed both high hands on his shoulders. "Naruto, yes, you did kill someone," Inu started explaining. "However, given how others have treated you in the past, I think it's safe to say that had you not killed him, he would have killed you." He paused as he looked towards the dead body and noticed a knife lying not far from the man's right hand, causing him to nod before turning back to face Naruto. "However, this is a very serious issue, and I'm afraid that it's going to have serious repercussions for you in the immediate future," he went on. "So, I'm afraid that you're going to have to come with me to see the Hokage." Naruto looked up at Inu cautiously as he contemplated whether or not to believe him or not. For all he knew, it could still be a trap. In all Naruto's years of being hated, he had learned to read people's feelings through their eyes. He remembered the ice-cold glares he received whenever he passed anyone by when they weren't looking to kill him. Through those glares, he learned how to read a person's feelings just by looking into their eyes. The eyes seemed to be the one thing that could not mask a person's true feelings. Naruto had seen neutral and indifferent expressions on some of the people's faces, and whenever there were situations that dealing with other people was unavoidable, Naruto saw that some of them would put on polite and happy smiles, but just by looking into their eyes Naruto knew how they really felt about him. A person's facial expression could hide a person's true feelings, a person's body language may be able to hide a person's true feelings, but a person's eyes couldn't hide their true feelings. Whenever a person tried to hide their true feelings behind masks of politeness and neutrality, their eyes reflected their true feelings. It was something that Naruto learned very early on. Unfortunately, in this case, Inu's eyes were hidden underneath his dog mask. As easy as the material that covered the eyeholes made it for Inu to see, Naruto just couldn't see his eyes through the material, so Naruto knew that he had to be extra cautious while around Anbu since their masks shielded their eyes from his gaze. The Anbu seemed to be more loyal to the Sandaime than the regular ninja, though Naruto's experiences in the past had taught him that one could never be too careful. One time, an Anbu did participate in one of the villagers' beatings, though he was quickly dealt with, but the experience had scarred Naruto, and from then on, he knew never to trust anyone, even those who were seemingly loyal and obedient. "Please Naruto, you'll have to trust me on this," Inu said in a semi-pleading, yet serious tone, as if sensing the blonde's insecurities. Naruto just continued to stare at him suspiciously, but at the very least, he got up off his knees and Inu stood up and took his hand in his own. "I assure you Naruto that we're going to the Hokage," Inu said as he walked out of the ally with Naruto. "I honestly don't know what will happen to you, but I think it's safe to assume that the villagers will now want your head more than ever." Naruto flinched at this. Somehow he knew that it was true. As soon as those who had fled calmed down and realized that they were in no danger, their anger and hate would no doubt return even stronger than ever now that he had gone and killed someone, and from what Naruto remembered, the villagers' anger and hatred had been more intense than it had ever been before, and with a villager's death only adding to that, Naruto knew that the next few days were going to be even more of a living hell than before. That is assuming he survived that long. All he could do now was trust Inu and hope that he wouldn't lead him to his death. Naruto knew that he was no match for Inu, heck, he was no match for the man that he killed and only managed to kill him because he caught him off guard, and Naruto then realized that going with Inu was not a choice. He had no choice but to trust him and hope for the best, though the woman's words on how he should become a monster and kill everyone seemed to become increasingly tempting as his wariness about Inu grew with every passing second. Later that night at the Hokage Tower, much to Naruto's relief, both he and Inu stood before the Sandaime Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen himself, as he listened to Inu's account on what happened. Needless to say, the old Hokage just sighed and shook his head once Inu finished, as he knew that the next few days were going to cause him a major headache. "So, you came across Naruto in an alley next to a dead body with a shard of glass lodged in the man's throat, and Naruto here admitted to killing the man," Hiruzen said as he closed his eyes for a moment. "Hi," Inu said with a nod as he turned his head and looked down at Naruto, who was standing next to him on his left side. Hiruzen sighed once again as he shook his head. This was just perfect. Ever since the Yondaime sacrificed his life to seal away the Kyuubi no Yoko, he had been forced to reinstate himself, as the Yondaime hadn't gotten round to naming his successor before the beast attacked. Since he assumed his old post, it had been one major problem after another, and many of those problems centered round Naruto and the villagers' hatred of him. When he first retook his old post, he had honored the Yondaime's wish that Naruto be made a hero and tried to see to it that the boy had as much of a normal life as a Jinchuriki could possibly have. He even made a decree that no one was to tell Naruto or the younger generation of Naruto's connection to the beast that almost destroyed their villager and slaughtered so many of their loved ones, hoping that the younger generation would come to accept Naruto. Even those who were caught whispering about it were dealt with. It was why the former general store owner was executed. His ranting over how Naruto had stolen a pen and let off a stink bomb in his store afterwards had almost caused him to spill the beans, and Hiruzen remembered when the man actually had the nerve to lash out at him when he tried to calm him down. 7 months ago, a few days after Naruto's theft, everyone ran of the general store after an explosion occurred at the back and a foul odor quickly spread, causing everyone in the smell to quickly run outside with their hands over their mouths as they struggled to prevent the contents of their stomachs from making their way to the outside world, and some failed miserably as they vomited right there on the street. Ew, gross, a woman who was just passing by commented as she witnessed a man throw up right in front of her, just missing throwing up over her chest by a few centimeters. She was about to deliver a vicious slap to the man who dared try to vomit on her when her nose caught a faint whiff of the smell coming from inside the store and heard the sound of coughs and vomiting, prompting her to look to her right, and she saw an awful lot of people outside the general store struggling to cope with the foul smell that passed through their noses. Her eyes widened at this, but before she could ask anyone what had happened, she heard a child's laughter from behind her, causing her to spin round. Ha, ha, ha. Take that. A blonde-haired 5-year-old with big blue eye and whiskers that appeared to be painted on his cheeks said as he pointed at the scene, laughing as if what happened was one of the funniest things in the world. That'll teach you to overcharge me, you grouchy old prune. Oh, it's just him, the woman thought as her face twisted to an expression of disgust and contempt. Another disaster orchestrated by that vermin. She then snorted in disgust before turning and stormed off, wanting to get as far away from the demon brat as possible. You disgusting little troll, the store owner screamed as he glared daggers at Naruto as his eyes radiated fury, hate and pure rage. I'm gonna skin you alive for this. Ha, ha, just try it, you decrepit old prune, Naruto said tauntingly as he turned round and bent over before looking back at the store owner and slapped his own butt. By the way, kiss my ass, old man. The store owner felt an eyebrow twitch as he watched Naruto's antics and struggled to restrain himself from lunging at the boy and ripping his throat out. He was sure that it was what Naruto was hoping for, and he knew that it would probably lead to another humiliating situation. What's the matter, ya scared? Naruto continued to taunt. You said you were gonna skin me alive. Well, here I am. Come get me if you can. You, the man growled in a dangerous tone as he clenched his fist and raised it in front of his face. By the way, I just found out that your mama was so fat, she makes even the fattest Akamichi look slim and grossly underweight. How the hell did your daddy make love to the bitch? That was all it took. The store owner exploded with rage as he lunged at Naruto, who was already running away. You insensitive little fox, he screamed just as two Anbu appeared and moved to restrain him as Naruto rounded a corner. I'll kill you. I'll kill you. You'll pay for your INOSOLENCE, damn Kyuubi. This caused everyone in the area to gasp, as they were well aware of the Sandame's decree, and this furious man just broke it. Not that anyone could blame him. He was letting his anger and rage take control, and it was clear that he was seeing red. Alright, calm down, one of the Anbu said as he held him back from chasing after Naruto. Let me go, the outraged store owner screamed. He has to die. That thing must die. We must finish what the Yondaime started. Shut up, the other Anbu said in a serious tone as he placed his hand over the man's mouth. However, the livid man just responded by maneuvering the top of his mouth over the Anbu's fingers and bit down hard, causing the man to scream in pain and release him, which caused everyone else who were watching to gasp in shock as the store owner turned to the other Anbu and drove his knee into his crotch. The men in the crowd all winced and unconsciously covered their own crotches with their hands. He's in for it now, a man said as he watched the store owner start to chase after Naruto, only to be restrained by more Anbu. You bunch of demon lovers. The irate man screamed in outrage. Have you all been brainwashed? The Kyuubi must die. You dare protect it? Okay, that's enough out of you. A new voice came, causing everyone to look in the direction Naruto had run off in to see the Sandame walking towards the enraged store owner with an Anbu wearing a dog mask behind him. Calm down, the Sandame went on in a seriously hard tone. You're lucky there are no children present to hear your annoying rants. Now calm down. The man's reply was to spit in his face and give him a glare of pure rage and hate. You demon-loving old relic, he spat with pure venom dripping from his voice. You dishonor your chosen successor by allowing that thing to roam around freely when it should have been laid to rest the moment it was born. I say that we rise up and put you to death next to that disgusting vermin you love you much." The Sandaime just gave the man a hard stare with no visible reaction. The rest of the crowd gasped at the man's words. Talk like that could be seen as treason, and as kind and caring as the Sandaime was, everyone knew better than to get on his bad side. He was one of the greatest shinobi that Konoha had ever produced while he was in his prime, and though much of that strength had left him since then, the villagers still knew that he was still more than capable of defending himself if the situation called for him to do so, which was why none of the villagers ever spoke openly about how they felt about his fondness for the demon brat. "It is you who dishonors my chosen successor, you all do," the Sandaime replied, turning to face the crowd as he said the last part. "It was the Yondaime's dying wish that the boy be seen as a hero, and yet, none of you honor it. You disrespect him by persecuting the one he chose to keep the monster at bay from destroying our village." "You lie," the store owner said in a dangerously low growl. "There's no way the Yondaime would want us to look up to that walking monstrosity. He basically sealed the beast into that human form so he could finish the job. How dare you even suggest that twisted notion?" The Sandaime sighed as he shook his head before giving the Anbu a hard stare. "Take him away, I'll deal with him later," he ordered as he shot the man a harsh glare. The Anbu all nodded and dragged the man off, leaving the Sandaime shaking his head as he knew that this would only create another problem for him to deal with. Present, Hiruzen shook his head as he remembered that incident. He hadn't wanted to execute the man, but he felt that he had no choice. The man was clearly going to reveal everything if he had been allowed to live, and from what Inu had told him about Naruto's victim, Inu had recognized him as that same man's brother. The general store was now under new ownership, but he remembered old owner's brother violently objecting to that notion as he said that that store had been in his family for generations and he should run the store in his brother's place. However, Hiruzen had shaken his head at that and forced the selling of the store as a form of posthumous punishment for the man's dead brother. He knew that the dead store owner's brother blamed Naruto not only for the death of his brother, whom he had been close to, but also for the loss of his family's store. However, he hadn't expected the man's hatred to be the cause of his demise just like his brother's. He just knew that this was going to have serious repercussions in the coming days. "Why did I agree to take this job back?" he thought with a depressed sigh. "Since my reinstatement I've had to deal with nothing but trouble." He then cleared his throat and gave Naruto a kind-hearted smile before his face became serious. "Okay Naruto, Inu-san here's told me that you killed someone, and though I'm sure that you were only defending yourself, I'd like to hear your side of it," he said in a serious, yet gentle tone. "Hi Gigi," Naruto said with a nod before he started recounting what had happened. How he was out for a walk and happened to stumble upon the festival celebrating the Kyuubi no Yoko's demise, and how someone saw him and a crowd of villagers chased him into an alley, and how the man advanced on him with a knife, and how his mind went blank, and how he remembered seeing the shard of glass he remembered holding in his hand lodged in the man's throat. He also recounted how the crowd all fled after that, and how the looks on their faces reminded him of the two orphanage matrons that threw him out of the orphanage after he lashed out at them for siding with a boy that tried to steal his teddy bear, and then how the mysterious woman came and told him to go and make the village pay for his suffering. Hiruzen's eyes widened after hearing Naruto's story of the woman before hardening into a deadly serious look. "You say that she came in and told you to kill more villagers?" he asked in a tone that Naruto knew meant that he was in no mood for dealing with trouble, and he had the look to back it up. Naruto said in a more confident tone than before, as he felt safe. "I was depressed, still am at what happened, and then I heard this woman's voice. She asked what was wrong and I told her, and so then went on to tell me what I should go and kill everyone, strike fear into their hearts and destroy the village, and I have to say that I'm kinda tempted to do that, but I just don't know what I should do." Hiruzen gave Inu a look and then motioned to the door with his head, indicating that he would like to speak with Naruto alone, and Inu nodded and gave a bow before leaving. Naruto watched him go and then turned back to face Hiruzen, a man who he had come to look up to as a grandfather. "Gigi," he said in a confused tone, "where'd Inu-san go?" "I sent him out," Hiruzen replied as he gave Naruto a serious look. "I want to talk to you about what this woman said to you. Now can you tell me what she looked like?" Naruto shook his head. "I didn't see who she was," he said with a sigh. "I was looking down at the ground the entire time. I couldn't believe that I actually killed that guy. Sure, he was going to kill me, but..." Hiruzen let out a disappointed sigh and shook his head. He had been planning on having the woman hunted down and brought in for questioning, but unfortunately, due to Naruto's depression, he couldn't do a thing because Naruto hadn't bothered to look up to see who was talking to him. The fact that someone had told Naruto to retaliate against the village for his suffering was troubling. If Naruto decided to follow the woman's advice and then discovered that he hosted the Kyuubi, Hiruzen feared that the Kyuubi would use the situation to its advantage, and that could potentially spell disaster for not just Konoha, but the entire 5 great elemental shinobi nations as a whole. If someone was looking to incite Naruto to retaliate against the village, then it was imperative that this person was found and apprehended. Unfortunately, all he had to go on was that this person was a woman, didn't really narrow it down all that much. Anyway, Hiruzen knew that he would have to do something about it. If he couldn't catch this woman, then he would make sure he'd derail whatever plans she may have for Naruto, and he'd start by making sure Naruto understood that what this woman wanted him to do was wrong. Naruto, your depression over what you did is understandable, but you did what you did because you had no other choice, he started to explain, catching Naruto's full attention. As a shinobi, I've killed more people than anyone could ever imagine, and I still remember how I felt when I made my first kill. I wasn't thinking clearly and my enemy was coming right at me, and I just acted without realizing what I was doing. It's depressing, I know, and the guilt and pain afterwards is so overwhelming it's almost unbearable. If it wasn't for Tobirama-sensei, who became the Nidaime Hokage and my immediate predecessor, I probably would have contemplated taking my own life. What did he do? Naruto asked curiously, clearly intrigued at what his grandfatherly figure was telling him. You felt the same way I did. But how did you deal with it? Tobirama-sensei explained to me there are instances throughout life where one person may have no choice but to kill another person. Hiruzen replied with a sigh, as difficult as that is to live with, it's true. Just about everyone feels sick about their first kill, though there are exceptions. It's a horrible feeling having to take the life of another, and yet there are people out there who enjoy it and only kill just for the fun of it. However, in your case, you killed because that man would have killed you had you not done anything. Survival is the most powerful of human instincts, and as much as those idiotic villagers believe otherwise, you're just as human as the rest of them. You were in a situation where it was either him or you, and your instincts took over to protect you. Naruto looked on in wonder and awe as he listened. My instincts? He said with a look of wonder on his face. Yes, Hiruzen replied with a nod. The instinct to survive is so powerful that it could, at times, overwhelm everything else and cause you to act without thinking. If someone was going to kill you, then your instincts would tell you to kill that person before he can kill you. As shocking and as upsetting as this is to hear, sometimes you must kill your enemy to protect yourself and your home. Ninjas are trained killers who do missions for the village, but also protect the village from those who seek its destruction, and to do that, they must sometimes kill the enemy to do so, otherwise the enemy would kill them and then destroy everything they fought to protect. I think I understand, Naruto said with a nod, though he still seemed a bit unsure of himself. But what about what that woman told me? Hiruzen sighed and shook his head. Don't listen to her, Naruto, he said in a harsh, serious tone as he gave the boy a hard stare. Whatever you do, you mustn't listen to her. People who go down that road always end up dead. Naruto was taken aback by his grandfatherly figure's sudden change in tone, and he took a few steps back with a small hint of fear in his eyes, causing Hiruzen to sigh. Naruto, I'm sorry I startled you, he said in a gentler tone and sighed. However, you mustn't go down that road. It'll only lead you to a premature grave. Oh, okay, Gigi, if you say yes so, Naruto said in a hesitant tone as he gave the old Hokage an uneasy look. I know it's tempting considering what you've been through your entire life, but by going down that road, the road of vengeance, you'll end up becoming just exactly what you set out to destroy, if not worse, Hiruzen explained, giving Naruto a serious look. Revenge is a powerful thing, and the desire for it is part of human nature. However, those who go seeking revenge only end up hurting themselves in the end and are left with nothing. Is that what you want? Naruto shook his head. All he wanted in life was acknowledgement that wasn't covered with hate and scorn. He wanted to be accepted by the village and to have the one thing it seemed that fate had denied him. People who he could call family. People who didn't judge him for whatever reason the villagers had for hating him, and the more he thought about, the more he came to realize that taking the woman up on her advice would mean that he would still be denied those things. Hiruzen nodded at Naruto's expression as he knew that Naruto realized the logic in what he was saying. So, if I were to kill more people, I'll just be like the people who tried to kill me, he said, and Hiruzen nodded. They call me names like demon and monster, you know, Naruto said as he looked down at the floor with a depressed look on his face, but he then looked back up at the old Hokage with a determined look in his eyes. So what you're saying that if I did do what that woman told me, I'll not only become just as hateful as they are, but I'll be proving them right? Hiruzen nodded. If you take revenge on a monster, then you become just like that monster, he said in a serious tone. Though you have every right to defend yourself, and I won't hold it against you if someone else ends up dead because you were defending yourself. That is within your right as a human being, but if you kill out of hatred, you'll become every bit a monster as the one they see you as. May Kami help us all if that ever happens, he added in his thoughts with a wince, remembering that Naruto had the Kyuubi sealed within him. Naruto's determination did not waver for a minute. He then looked Hiruzen right in the eye. Then from this day forward, I, Uzumaki Naruto, vow never to kill another living soul unless I have no other choice, he declared in a seriously hard tone. I don't know why everyone hates me so much, and I'm sure they have their reasons, but I'm gonna prove them all wrong about me someday. I'm gonna strive to prove myself to everyone, and then I'll become Hokage someday. Hiruzen chuckled as he watched Naruto making his declaration, and the edges of his lips curled into a smile. Leave it to Naruto to brighten up one of his dull moods. Besides, what would Teuchi Gigi and Ayame-chan think of me if I did go on a killing spree of the village? He went on as he thought about the owner of the Ichiraku ramen stand and his daughter. They'd no doubt abandon me. Ichiraku Teuchi and his daughter Ayame were perhaps the only two villagers who didn't regard him with such hatred and scorn. They didn't participate in any of the beatings, nor did they chase him away from their stand. They were the only ones who treated him as if he was a person and not some kind of monster. Ramen was Naruto's favorite food, and he visited the ramen stand frequently, and both Teuchi and Ayame enjoyed his company. He realized that if he were to give in to temptation and become a monster, then he'd be abandoning them, and they, along with Inu, were his only friends, and that only served to strengthen his resolve. I won't kill again, he said to Hiruzen in a serious tone and a determined look in his eyes, as if he had given the nail a final strike with the hammer. I'll become a ninja and prove everyone wrong about me. I swear it. Hiruzen nodded with a smile on his face. That's the spirit, Naruto, he said, glad that Naruto's spirits, as well as his own, had been lifted. Later that night, Inu was standing in the Hokage's office. Inu stood before the Sandaime awaiting orders. Ever since Naruto's vow and declaration, Hiruzen had been deep in thought, knowing that the next few days, if not weeks, will become difficult, as Naruto's killing would no doubt send shockwaves throughout the village, making the villagers' hatred more intense than ever before, and the fact that it happened on the anniversary of Kyuubi's defeat only made matters worse. Yeah, Naruto had picked a fine day to lash out and defend himself, and the old Hokage knew that an awful lot of people would be demanding Naruto's head, as they feared that they would be next. He also knew that it would be increasingly difficult for Naruto to keep his vow, especially since he had decided to become a shinobi, as killing was part of a shinobi's job. At least the shinobi of Konoha exercised the rule of only kill as a last resort, and only kill those you need to kill. Wasn't always possible, but at least they made an effort to minimize innocent fatalities, unlike other hidden villages in other nations. Though Hiruzen knew from experience how hard it was for a shinobi to hold back, especially in a fight for survival, and getting caught up in the moment was commonplace when dealing with enemy ninja that you were ordered to capture, not kill. However, he cast all those thoughts aside and gave Inu a serious look. Hokage-sama? Inu said as he looked at the old man curiously. Kakashi, I feel that I must discuss Naruto with you, Hiruzen said, placing his elbows on the desk and clasped his hands underneath his chin, which he rested on top of his hands. I fear that the next few days are going to be trouble for him. Inu, or Kakashi he was called while off duty, put his hand over his mask and removed it, revealing his face. The lower was covered in a black mask that covered his nose and mouth and looked as if it was part of his shirt, as it was made from the same material. He also wore a black hite-8 that ran diagonally over the top part of his face, covering his left eye, and in the gray metal part of the hite-8 was the village's insignia, a diagonal straight line that moved from right to left downwards at the top right-hand side that almost immediately went into a spiral pattern, and a point like an arrow pointing in a diagonal direction downwards at the bottom left-hand side. Is this about the incident earlier? Kakashi asked curiously as he stared at his superior with a questioning look on his face. Hiruzen lifted his chin off his clasped hands and nodded. Yes, unfortunately, I fear that it's going to send ripples throughout the village, and unfortunately the villagers' attacks on him will only increase in future, since today's also the anniversary of the Yondaimi's death and the Kyuubi's defeat. Kakashi nodded with a sigh. He had been one of the Yondaimi's students back when the Yondaimi was a Jonin, and he was also one of the few people who knew the truth about Naruto's parents. He knew that Naruto was his former sensei's son. Naruto was like a miniature version of the Yondaimi, at least in appearance. How the villagers didn't make that connection was beyond him, though he suspected that many had made that connection, and since many of them believed that Naruto was the Kyuubi's human form, he wouldn't be surprised if they believed that Kyuubi had chosen to take on a human form that resembled their beloved Yondaimi just to mock them. It disgusted Kakashi to no end how ignorant and delusional the people of Konoha were. He let out a dissatisfied growl as he thought about it. Minato-sensei, did you save the village just so they could take their anger out on your son? He said aloud as he clenched his fists, and Hiruzen saw the anger within Kakashi's visible onyx black eye. What sort of father are you? Many people lost loved ones as well as their homes, and you believed that they'd respect your dying wish to see your son as their hero when he contains the one responsible for their suffering? You should have just let the village burn and fled with Naruto and Kushina-san. Kakashi, don't blame Minato for what happened, Hiruzen said in a pleading tone as he knew that Kakashi blamed his former sensei for Naruto's hellish life. As you already know, he wouldn't abandon the village for anything, even if he did foresee the kind of life his son would be subjected to. Understand that he was a kind and caring man who would do anything to protect all that he cared for, and he just couldn't bring himself to seal the Kyuubi in a random child if he wasn't prepared to sacrifice his own child. I know, Kakashi said with a frustrated sigh as he calmed down, but still. He had to admit that there was truth in the old man's words. He remembered during the attack that his sensei's best friend offered his own child in Naruto's place, but Minato had denied his request, saying that if he couldn't bring himself to use his own son, then it labeled him a hypocrite in all he stood for. Unfortunately, the man had died during the attack, which meant he couldn't take Naruto in, and unfortunately, his widow sided with the villagers in their quest to eradicate the demon brat. Kakashi, I know that you're upset about Naruto's predicament, and perhaps having someone to blame seemingly makes it easier, but it's not going to help anyone. Unfortunately, the villagers are too blinded by their anger and hatred to realize that. Yeah, they know that Naruto has the Kyuubi sealed away in him, and they use him as a perfect scapegoat, Kakashi remarked bitterly. Hiruzen nodded with a depressing sigh. However, if you're implying that Minato lacked foresight, then you're right, he said as he turned to look up at Kakashi. They don't understand the truth, and humans have always feared what they don't understand. The Kyuubi killed a lot of people before Minato sealed it away, and it was his dying wish that Naruto be seen as a hero, but human nature being what it is caused the villagers to dishonor this request. Many claimed that it was an outright lie and some kind of trick by the Kyuubi made to fool them into harboring it until its power was restored. Kakashi nodded with a growl. Anyway, Kakashi, I've decided to give you a mission concerning Naruto to help get him through the next couple of days, Hiruzen said as he remembered why he called Kakashi into his office. A mission concerning Naruto? Kakashi said as he stared at the Sandaime with a curious and questioning look on his face. Hiruzen nodded. Yes, when he was in here earlier, he expressed a desire to become a ninja. Hiruzen explained as he gave Kakashi a look that said, you don't have a choice in this. He also made a vow never to kill again unless absolutely necessary, but I know him. He'd rather not kill at all, even if there was no other option. And the village call him a monster? Kakashi said as a humorless joke, only to be silenced by a glare from Hiruzen. Someday, I know that he'll be forced to break that vow, and I'm not sure if he'll have the courage to do it. He went on without commenting Kakashi on his joke. Your mission, Kakashi, will be to train Naruto in the ways of the shinobi and help him overcome this fear of killing, and the reason I'm asking you this is because I don't trust those senseis at the academy, especially that new one, Mizuki. I don't trust them at all with Naruto's education. They'd no doubt do everything in their power to sabotage his progress, or perhaps have one of the other students kill him under the cover of a sparring accident. So, I'm entrusting his education to you, though he still will attend the academy and will report back to you on what his senseis have taught him, and you will correct the errors in those teachings. But Hokage-sama, why me? Kakashi said with a surprised look on his face, as if he couldn't believe what was happening. Because Kakashi, aside from Amino Iruka, who's also new as an academy sensei, you're the only one I trust with him, Hiruzen said as he gave Kakashi a refuse and you'll regret it stare. However, Iruka will be too busy to teach him anything. Besides, you're his father's student. Don't you think that you'll be doing your sensei proud by helping out his son? If Minato knew the treatment his son was getting, no doubt he'll be weeping in his grave or from within the Shinigami's belly. I've already informed your superiors in the Anbu that you'll be taking extended leave for a few years. Kakashi thought about it for a few minutes as he assumed a thinking pose, the same one he took when he first met Team 7, and then after a long silence, he nodded. Okay, I'll do it. I'll train him if that's what you want, he said as he gave the Sandaime a look that told him that there were conditions attached. However, I'll only teach him what's taught at the academy and nothing else. I won't teach him any jutsu other than those that are taught at the academy. He'll have to learn new jutsu like elemental jutsus on his own. Understood Kakashi, Hiruzen said with a nod. I was about to tell you that anyway, not to teach him anything other than what's taught at the academy. Kakashi then bowed and then turned to leave the office. 6 months later, Uzumaki Naruto walked down the streets of Konoha feeling rather content with himself, despite the glares he was receiving as he walked by the villagers. 6 months had passed since that horrible incident on the 10th of October where he had been forced to kill that man in self-defense, and just as the Sandaime had predicated, the incident sent shockwaves throughout the village and the villagers had been after his head more than ever for the next 2 months until the Sandaime had managed to calm them down when he had gathered the villagers outside the Hokage Tower and explained how it was only an act of self-defense. Needless to say, this didn't sit well with the villagers, especially those who had been there that day as part of the crowd that had chased him. It certainly didn't help Naruto as far as earning the village's acceptance and respect went. Even if they knew what really happened, it didn't matter to the villagers. Since Naruto was the demon container, they felt that he had no right to defend himself and should just die. However, since then, Naruto had started sending the villagers glares whenever he felt that they were moving in to attack him and had gotten ready to defend himself as he remembered the Sandaime's lecture, and it usually scared them off. But a few brave people did attack him and he did defend himself, though his efforts were mostly futile. But at least his attackers didn't get away unscathed and the Anbu or some regular ninja would always break up the fighting before it turned ugly, especially Kakashi. Also, since that day when he killed the man and had a lecture with the Sandaime, Naruto had been taken under the wing of Hitaki Kakashi, whom he learned was Inu's real name and that Inu was just a codename he used while on duty as part of the Anbu. Kakashi had helped train Naruto in the ways of the shinobi, though he still attended the academy. However, Kakashi had explained to him that the Sandaime had told him that he felt that the academy senseis were intentionally sabotaging his education and that Naruto was to tell him what he was supposed to be taught so he could correct the teachings that the senseis gave him, which he did. Naruto's life in the academy was no different than life out on the streets. None of the other students spoke to him and it was clear that the senseis, with the exception of Amino Iruka, hated him as much as the villagers did. They paid little attention to him and whenever he asked to have something explained to him in a simpler explanation, they would always berate and yell at him, telling him to go stand in a corner or go wait outside so he could be punished for misbehavior. It was no better with written tests. Naruto had always found the questions too hard and were clearly beyond someone with his age group's capabilities to answer. He had once tried looking at the test paper of the person sitting next to him to try and copy off him, but to his surprise and shock, it was a different paper with questions that he could easily answer, well, most of them. Sure, there were a few questions he couldn't answer even on the correct test paper, but the fact was that he had intentionally been given the wrong paper to ensure that he failed, and whenever he did manage to successfully answer even one of the questions on a blue moon occasions, the sensei would immediately accuse him of cheating with some lame excuse to justify his accusation. Naruto had originally thought that he was given the wrong paper by mistake, but from the way the sensei had verbally lashed out at him, it was clear that they were doing it intentionally. With Kakashi's training, however, Naruto was getting better and the senseis at the academy were finding it increasingly difficult to fail him, as he was also becoming braver and Kakashi helped him with his knowledge, which caused him to answer the advanced questions easily, and when accused of cheating, Naruto bravely demanded that they prove it, and much to their displeasure, they found that they couldn't and had no choice but to pass him. The same was true in the practical side of the training. Naruto's jutsu was greatly improving and the frustrated senseis had no choice but to pass him. Sure, they could just fail him anyway, but the problem was that the Hokage had been made aware of Naruto's improvement and the senseis were smart enough to know that failing Naruto regardless of his performance would bring the Sandame's wrath upon them, and that was something they feared immensely. Despite the Sandame's old age and the fact that he was nowhere near as powerful as he was in his prime, he could still take down Chunin-level ninja, which was the rank of an academy sensei. Kakashi's training also made it easier to ward off would-be attackers, though true to his word, he never killed any of them whenever he beat them. He would just walk away, giving the person a threat to never attack him again or else. This led to a very small minority of the villagers starting to rethink their views of Naruto, though they were still wary of him and the majority of the village were still out for his blood. The small minority that were rethinking their views of Naruto weren't prepared to let go of their original views, but with their re-evaluations, they were starting to at the very least tolerate him, though should something happen that would seemingly prove everyone right, they would immediately rejoin the majority in wanting him dead. It wasn't much, but it was a start, though Naruto was aware that it was pretty fragile and even the smallest of incidents could break it, like pranks, which he still used as his means of revenge. However, with his constant refusal to kill and his revenge pranks, the small minority was both gaining and losing members and was never really getting any bigger. Naruto was currently on his way home from the academy. Kakashi had given him the day off since the situation at the academy had reached the point where most of the senseis felt that it was pointless to try and sabotage Naruto's education as they had learned that he'd figure it out, though Kakashi still trained Naruto just in case, as he knew the senseis still hated Naruto and he wouldn't put it past them to investigate how Naruto was overcoming the flaws in the training that they intentionally gave him, and if they discovered that Naruto's secret training had stopped, they'd immediately go back to sabotaging his lessons, as well as a few senseis still tried their hand at sabotage regardless. Anyway, Naruto was content with himself. Things weren't looking up as much as he'd like them to, but it was a start. He ignored the glares and whispers the people he passed by gave him. His big smile seemed to only fuel the villagers' hate, as it was something they were not used to and they were a bit afraid that the demon was close to having its power restored, and from Naruto's actions after that, the 10th of October. They believed that only confirmed their fears. Disgusting vermin, Naruto heard a woman say, "Go back to hell where you belong." He then noticed a projectile hurling towards him out of the corner of his eye and quickly raised his hand and caught it before looking in the direction it had come from to find a woman with an outstretched hand looking at him with an expression of shock and fear. He then brought his hand in front of his face and studied the projectile that the woman had thrown at him and shook his head. It was nothing more than an apple. Painful if it had hit, yes, but nothing lethal. "Right back at you," he said as he brought his hand up and pulled it back before launching it forward and releasing the apple, which caused it to hurl towards the woman at near impossible speed. Luckily for the woman, the apple just narrowly missed her head by a few centimeters and slammed into the wall of the building behind her, causing a crack in the wall, and the apple itself exploded before falling to the ground in pieces. "Be glad that wasn't your head," Naruto said in a serious tone as he backed it up with a hard stare. "I don't kill people. But next time you decide to try something like that, well, let's just say you'll be seeing death as more of a generosity compared to what I'll do to you." He then turned and walked away. His good mood darkened as the woman just stared at the pieces of apple on the ground with a shocked look on her face as she realized that Naruto had missed her on purpose, and that if the apple had hit her at the speed it was traveling when Naruto threw it, she'd probably be dead. 7-year-old Haruno Sakura was walking along the pathway in Konoha Park admiring the scenery. It was a beautiful day today. The sun was shining brightly down on the village, highlighting its buildings in a beautiful golden glow, and there was not a cloud to be seen in the sky anywhere. It was warm with a soft breeze that cooled the temperature down a bit, and Sakura watched as a bluebird returned to its nest in a nearby tree with food for its chicks. Butterflies hovered around the flowers, and there was something about the peace and tranquility that made the pink-haired girl feel at ease. Unfortunately, she was also a bit disappointed. Yamanaka Ino, her best friend, couldn't come out and join her today as she was currently experiencing a really bad cold, which was unfortunate. Ino was part of the Yamanaka clan, whose main jutsu revolved around getting into their opponents' minds and using it for spying or to get their enemies to turn on their allies or cause harm to themselves. The Yamanaka clan's jutsu also allowed them to enter another person's mind and have access to the person's memories, thoughts, personality and so on. A Yamanaka could find out everything there was to know about a person just by going into that person's mind, which would make the Yamanaka clan excellent psychiatrists. However, the Yamanaka clan were into botany and they owned a flower shop in the village. Sakura had been hoping that Ino would help her in their flower arranging assignment that they had gotten from the academy. Since Ino's clan owned a flower shop, Ino was somewhat of an expert on flowers and Sakura, well, she was just clueless about the whole thing. In the classes with Suzume-sensei, Sakura always had Ino to guide her, but now that Suzume-sensei had given the class an assignment to go off and do flower arranging on their own as a homework assignment, Sakura found herself struggling. Everything Ino told her seemed to just vanish from her head. She had tried arranging flowers on her own, but the end result was downright terrible and very off-putting for anyone being offered that particular bouquet. Her mother had said so, though she had told her in a polite manner. Sakura sighed as she shook her head. She just wasn't good at anything like Ino was. One of Sakura's main down points was her lack of confidence and self-esteem. Before she met Ino, she was the constant target of bullies because of the fact that she had a wider than average forehead, so she used her bangs to try and hide it, but it only served to make things worse and add fuel to the fire. Because of that, she was mostly alone and constantly crying because of her loneliness. However, one day, Ino found her crying sitting on one of the pathways in the park after some girls had another session of poking fun at her forehead. Sakura remembered how Ino befriended her and told her what the problem was, and the next day, she had given her a red ribbon for her to wear on her head to divert attention away from her forehead. Ino then introduced her to her friends and none of them made fun of her forehead, and whenever bullies approached her, Ino would deal with them. That had been the start of their friendship. Sakura really admired her best friend. Ino was popular, confident and so sure of herself, everything Sakura wanted to be. However, all the taunting and poking at her forehead had severely crushed her confidence long ago, and unfortunately, without Ino, Sakura didn't feel as brave as she did whenever Ino was around. Well, a voice came, causing Sakura to cringe as she stopped and slowly and hesitantly turned around as if fearing who was behind her and hoping that she was mistaken. Still strutting around like you're some big shot, the voice continued tauntingly in a boastful tone. Amy, Sakura said fearfully as she laid eyes on three girls who had clearly been following her and backed away as she looked into the eyes of the girl in the middle and started sweating. Fear quickly overcame her as she recognized those three girls. Her breathing became heavier as she frantically searched for a means of escape. Of all the days those three had to bother her, it had to be a day in which Ino wasn't there to stand up for her. The girl in the middle, Amy, just smirked at witnessing Sakura's reaction as she looked around as if to see if anyone was around, and when she saw that there wasn't, her smirk widened into an evil grin. Not so tough without Ino backing you up, eh, billboard brow? She said in a gentle voice, but laced with a cruel, arrogant tone. Sakura clenched her eyes shut and shook her head, wanting Amy and her lackeys to go away and hoping that it was just some cruel nightmare. Unfortunately for her, this was real, and Amy slowly walked round Sakura till she was behind her, blocking off her escape as her two lackeys stayed where they were, blocking off Sakura's retreat. Amy had long purple hair with cruel brownish-purple eyes filled with nothing but cruel pleasure at Sakura's predicament. She wore black sandal, a red skirt and a white shirt with a blue cardigan over it, and she stared at Sakura, giving her a mocking look as if to say, "What are you gonna do now?" Sakura gulped as she opened her eyes, and to her displeasure, her main antagonist was still there with her two lackeys mocking her feelings of helplessness. "Leave me alone," Sakura croaked as she attempted to gather what courage she could muster, but Ami's sneer only served to smash what little confidence she had gathered. "I'm afraid we can't do that, right girls?" Amy replied as she looked towards her two friends who just nodded in agreement. "You see, it seems that you're forgetting your place. You really think you're something special when you're not, and to tell you the truth, it's pissing me off. We're going to put you right back in your place where you belong, you big-headed little freak." Sakura continued to stare at Amy, frightened at what the cruel girl had planned for her, and her fear only increased as Amy let out a cruel laugh as she eyed the ribbon tied on top of Sakura's head. Out of all the bullies who had picked on Sakura because of her forehead, Amy was by far the worst. She had been the one to start it all off, and the others just followed her example. However, most of the bullies had given up once Ino entered the picture. However, Amy was persistent and constantly went out of her way to make Sakura's life miserable as if it was her life's mission. She didn't know why, but she really couldn't stand Sakura. Maybe it was her big forehead or her pink hair. Amy didn't know, but she would always make Sakura feel bad whenever she saw her. Besides, she found it fun and it gave her and her friends a good laugh, and she'd be damned if she was going to let some little Miss Popular wannabe as she saw Ino get in her way. "And what do we have here?" She said. Her hand grabbed the ribbon and violently yanked it off Sakura's head. Naruto was currently walking in Konoha Park. The woman's attack earlier had darkened his mood and he had altered his course so he could clear his head. His thoughts were currently on what they were always on. Why was he so hated in the village? What was it about him that made others hate him so much? It was like they hated him just for existing, and from what he heard the villagers say whenever they tried to kill him, it seemed that that was exactly the reason. However, Naruto was smart enough to know that it wasn't just that. He knew that there was more to it than that. People just don't hate others just because they exist. There was something else going on, and Naruto found himself a bit afraid of finding the answer. He wanted to know why everyone hated him, and yet, he was afraid of discovering it, afraid of what it could mean for him. He had this increasing feeling in the pit of his stomach that when he did discover the truth, he would not like the answer. However, he knew that he had to know, but at the same time, he didn't want to know since he feared of what would happen to him. "Hey, give that back," a girl's voice came, causing Naruto to come out of his thoughts and back to reality. He looked off to his left and saw a pink-haired girl reaching up to try and grab a red ribbon held up high by a purple-haired girl. He noticed another two girls standing behind the pink-haired girl with cruel smiles on their faces. Naruto recognized the kind of smile as he had seen that kind of smile on the faces of the villagers whenever they hurt him or managed to cause him misfortunate. The owner of the general store had a similar smile when he had demanded an even higher price for the pen Naruto wanted when Naruto had given his the amount he had originally asked, and seeing that sort of smile on those girls' faces while they watched the pink-haired girl struggle to obviously reclaim her ribbon from the purple-haired girl infuriated him. It was not him that was the target this time, but it infuriated him nonetheless. Just what had that girl done to deserve such treatment? It reminded him of himself and how the villagers tried to kill him. The pink-haired girl was in the same position he had constantly been in for most of his life, though he was sure that the three other girls weren't looking to kill her. However, that did nothing to soothe Naruto's increasing fury. The purple-haired girl violently grabbed the pink-haired girl's face with her free hand and then violently shoved her to the ground, causing her to land on her butt, and Naruto's fury only increased as he saw tears well up in the girl's jade-green eyes and started crying, and the three other girls just laughed at their victim's misfortunate. "Maybe now you'll know your place, you big-headed freak," the purple-haired boasted in a cruel, almost sadistic tone. "Don't think that overrated miss. I'm so glamorous I can do anything. So-called beauty queen, Ino's gonna protect ya forever." "Why, Amy?" the pink-haired girl sniffed as she wiped the tears from her cheeks with her fingers. What did I ever do to why you? You were born and you entered my life," the purple-haired girl, Amy said as her face twisted into an expression of pure anger and her tone became laced with hatred and venom, and she balled her free hand into a fist and brought it back, ready to slam it into the pink-haired girl's face. That was all Naruto could stand. He had heard that kind of talk before, only it was directed at him, and finding that he wasn't the only one who was hated just for their existence only served to infuriate him further. From what he could tell, this girl had done nothing wrong, and those three were making her life a living hell just because they didn't like her. At least in her case, they probably used the fact that their victim's forehead was wider than average as an excuse, Naruto figured. He had noticed the girl's forehead, but he didn't see that as a valid excuse for hating someone. The girl didn't ask to be born with a big forehead, just like he didn't ask for whatever the reason was for the villagers hating him. Amy brought the hand holding onto the ribbon down to her side and was about to launch her fist at her victim's face when Naruto quickly walked up to her and grabbed the ribbon and pulled it out of Ami's hand so fast that the material moving against Ami's skin caused her to feel a very painful burning sensation on the palm of her hand in her fingers. "Huh?" Amy said as she felt the excruciating pain of the friction burn on her hand and took a step backwards and dropped her fist. She then brought her sore hand up in front of her and saw a red mark on the palm and parts of her fingers that had been touching the ribbon. "What the?" she said as her face twisted in absolute fury as she noticed Naruto walking over to her victim and ignoring her like she wasn't even there. I believe this belongs to you, Naruto said as he held out the ribbon to the pink-haired girl, who sniffed as she wiped the last of her tears away. Who are you? She asked, giving Naruto a confused and wary look. I'm Uzumaki Naruto, Naruto said with a big fox-like grin on his face, and who might you be? Haruno SSS Sakura. The girl stuttered as she hesitantly held out her hand and took the ribbon from Naruto. Haruno Sakura, Naruto said as his face took on a thoughtful expression, before turning to one of realization a few seconds later. I remember you from the academy. I never actually met you, but I saw you around with that Yamanaka girl a few times. Sakura looked at Naruto with a blank stare, blinking a few times as she absorbed what he just said. Hey, Ami's infuriated voice came, interrupting Sakura's thoughts, don't just ignore me. Hey, isn't that boy that everyone hates so much? One of Ami's friends whispered to the other. The second girl said with a nod, that's him. The two girls looked at Naruto nervously as they felt a growing feeling of fear and dread well up in the pits of their stomachs. They were now unsure whether or not to continue with Ami's plan and they looked at their leader as if looking for answers. The plan was to rough Sakura up a bit and scare her. They never thought that anyone would intervene, never mind Naruto. Now that he had stepped in, they were wondering whether or not they should run. The adults had always said he was a demon and a monster. What would happen to them if they stayed? Would Naruto kill them, especially since they heard whispers about an incident 6 months ago in which it was said that he had killed someone? However, Amy didn't seem to care as she seemed more furious than scared that Naruto had ruined her fun. Naruto turned to face her and stood between her and Sakura, glaring daggers at her. He then turned his head both ways and shot a glare at Ami's two lackeys behind him and Sakura as if to say, try anything and you're dead, and the two girls gulped, not wanting to take the chance that it was an empty threat since the look in Naruto's eye told them that he was very capable of carrying out and he would carry it out if they tried anything against Sakura. Get lost, this don't concern you, Amy said as she continued to glare at Naruto who turned back to face her and returned her glare with contempt and disgust in his eyes. Just what the heck's your deal with Sakura-chan? He demanded through gritted teeth. I may not know her, but from what I saw of her at the academy, she's a very nice person who wouldn't hurt a fly. That's none of your business, Whisker Face, not beat it, Amy said, using the thumb of her left hand to point to the left as if showing him the way to go. However, Naruto's glare only intensified and Amy suddenly found her resolve shaken somewhat. However, she just gulped and reasserted herself as she resumed glaring at Naruto. I don't like the way you're treating her, Naruto growled, causing Amy to jerk back in fright. I heard what you said and you hate her just because she's alive. Why would anyone hate her for that? Amy growled as she tried reasserting herself once again. No way was she going to be scared off by the most hated person in the village. She knew who Naruto was and knew how the village seemed to just despise his very existence, not that she cared or anything. As long as Naruto didn't cross her, she saw no reason to seek him out unless he happened to come across her when she had nothing to do. She also heard the whispers about how he had killed someone 6 months previously during the anniversary festival of when the Yondaime defeated the Kyuubi no Yoko, but she just passed those off as just pointless rumors the adults had thought up to further justify their hatred of him. Not that it mattered to Amy. She could care less about the reasons the adults had for hating Naruto. She would only deal with him if he ever crossed her path and that was that. Just look at her forehead, she said in response to Naruto's statement just to humor him and get him to shut up as she knew he wouldn't go away. Look at the size of it. Naruto turned his head and his eyes fell upon Sakura's large forehead as they scanned every inch of it as Sakura looked on in a mixture of wonder and fear. Fear that Naruto would side with Amy in making her life miserable. Yeah, so? He said, turning back to glare at Amy. Her forehead is pretty big, but that's no reason to bully her. It's not her fault. She didn't ask to be born like that. Sakura's eyes widened in surprise at hearing that as she felt relief wash over her, glad that Naruto wasn't going to judge her by the size of her forehead. Of course you'd say that, Amy said in an unimpressed tone as she yawned and patted her open mouth with her fingers. Takes a freak to know a freak. You're just as much of a freak as she is, Whisker Face. I mean, what's with those whiskers anyway? Are you like part cat or something? I think you're just some monster that looks like a boy and forehead girls the same. Freaks. However, just as she finished talking, she suddenly found herself flying through the air before finally landing on the ground on her back with a really sore face. She looked up and saw Naruto with an outstretched fist glaring down at her with pure hate and contempt. "Amy!" The two lackey girls screamed as they both rushed over to their fallen leader. They both knelt down and tried to help her up, but Amy violently jerked her body away from them, feeling more humiliated than she ever felt in her entire life. Even more humiliated than that time Ino threw flowers into her mouth and said they were poisonous, which caused her and her lackeys to run off to find Suzume. "Don't touch me," Amy said in a dangerously low tone as she maneuvered herself into a sitting position and glared up at Naruto, struggling to hold back the tears that were welling up in her eyes and threatening to flow down her cheeks. "Say that again," Naruto said in a dangerously low tone as he took a step towards the three girls, causing two of them to back off, "only this time, say it to my face." Amy flinched at the harshness in his tone as her two friends screamed and ran off, abandoning their leader. "You," Amy said as she clenched her fists into the grass, severing several blades from their roots, and she picked herself up and shot Naruto and Sakura both a venomous look of pure hate. "You'll regret this." She then turned and stormed off in a rage, leaving Naruto glaring at her back till she was out of sight. Once she out of sight, Naruto turned to Sakura and held out his hand to help her up. "Are you okay?" he asked, staring at her with concern in his eyes. Sakura blinked for a few seconds as she just stared up at Naruto with a look of wonder highlighting her face, as if she were thinking whether or not to trust Naruto. After all, he did just rescue her from Amy when Ino was unable to because of her cold. She had overheard Ami's two lackeys talking earlier, and she knew that there was a boy in the village that nobody seemed to like and tried to kill frequently because of it. She had no idea why the adults were so determined to kill him for no apparent reason. She had asked her mother about it, but she wouldn't give her a straight answer and just said it was because he should have never been born. Sakura had been persistent, but her mother had urged her to drop it and told her that she didn't need to know why. She had seen Naruto once or twice at the academy, but those had just been passing glances and she didn't think much of it back then. However, now that he was here right here and now, and knowing that he was the boy all the adults had told their children to stay away from, she was unsure what to think. Her mother had told her to stay away from him and that he was a demon and a monster, and like before, when Sakura had persisted in finding out why her mother had said that, her mother had told her what she had told her about why he should never have been born, that she didn't need to know, and again told her to drop it. Sakura had done so, though she had still been curious about it. Just what was so bad about this boy? What did he do to merit such hostility from the adults? Most of the other children just followed their elders' example and treated him just like the adults did, believing that he was bad somehow, but Sakura started to wonder. Someone who had just saved her when she didn't ask his help couldn't be bad, could he? Why did you save me?" Sakura asked as she slowly and hesitantly took Naruto's hand and he pulled her up. "Are you really that boy, the one everyone hates?" Naruto looked down at the ground as he let out a depressed groan and sighed. He said as he turned and was about to walk off, believing that Sakura was going to turn against him. Like all the other children he befriended in the past. Sure, he did befriend some of the children, but they all abandoned him when their parents found out about their children's friendship with them. Sometimes, a child's mother or father would just walk up to them and drag their child away while glaring at him and telling their child not to go anywhere near him and that he would only lead them to an early demise, and the children all believed what their parents told him. Naruto found himself envious of the other children. They all had parents, and parents were supposed to set an example for their children to follow. Naruto wished he had parents, and he often wondered what happened to his parents. Did they abandon him and join the rest of the village, believing that bringing him into the world was a mistake? Did the village have a grudge against his family and murdered them, leaving him alive, and now the village were out to finish the job of eradicating the Uzumaki family? Naruto honestly had no idea what the story was. However, what upset him was that the parents of his temporary friends all hated him, and that was the example they set for their children, and they just followed them without question. It angered him to no end that the children were so blind, but then again, just about all the villagers hated him. He figured that maybe the children were afraid that the villagers would turn on them just for being with him. He knew that Tuchi and Ayame suffered at the hands of the villagers just for their acceptance of him. The only reason neither of them were the targets of lynch mobs was because the Ichiraku ramen stand was the only ramen stand in the village, and as much as they hated the owner and his daughter for their acceptance of Naruto, they enjoyed their ramen and weren't willing to risk losing the only ramen stand in the village just because of the management's acceptance of the demon brat. Naruto figured that perhaps the children feared similar treatment, only they wouldn't be so lucky since they had nothing to protect themselves like Tuchi and Ayame did. Wait, he heard Sakura say, causing him to stop and turn to face her curiously. Sakura remained silent for a moment as she realized that she had no idea what she was going to say to him, and then, at length, she let out a soft sigh. "Thank you for saving me," she said as she gave Naruto an unsure stare, as if unsure whether to trust him or not, "but, I must know, why? Why did you save me?" Naruto was silent for a moment as he stood there studying her face, and he looked into her eyes and saw the uncertainty and confusion within them. "Because Sakura-chan, those three girls reminded me of what everyone did to me my entire life," he replied with a sigh, shaking his head. "I hate that. It's not your fault your forehead's so big. It was how you were born, and I doubt you can choose how to be born." Sakura nodded and then gave Naruto an unsure stare. "So you don't think my forehead make me you ugly?" she asked hesitantly. "Mostly everyone aside from Ino-chan and her friend thinks so." Naruto shook his head. "No, I think you're beautiful and kinda cute," he said as he broke out in a fox-like grin. "You just wouldn't be you without your big forehead. Don't let those girls get ya down. I think it highlights your beauty perfectly, and I'm sure this Ino and her friends think so too." She's cheeks turned a bit red as she blushed a bit. Thanks," she said softly before giving Naruto a questioning look. "So Naruto-kun. Why does everyone hate you so much? I mean, if you saved me, you can't be all bad, right?" Naruto sighed as he looked away from Sakura and down at the ground, feeling depression set in. He then took a few steps away from Sakura and stopped just as Sakura opened her mouth to speak. He then looked up at the sky and gave another sigh. "I honestly don't know," he said in a sad, dejected tone. "Everyone thinks I'm some kind of monster or demon, and I don't remember doing anything to anyone. Like those three girls picking on you, it feels like everyone just hates me because I'm alive. They even said so a few times when they tried to kill me. I wish I knew why though. There has to be more to it than that, but no one will tell me why. They seem to think I already know." He then turned back to face Sakura as he felt tears start to well up in his eyes, and Sakura gasped when she looked into his eyes. She may not know how to read people by looking into their eyes as well as Naruto, but she could see the loneliness and sadness Naruto's eyes held. They weren't the eyes of a demonic monster like her mother and the rest of the village believed he was. They were the eyes of a lonely, desperate boy in need of love and affection who had been denied everything that was good in life. She knew right there and then that the villagers were all wrong about Naruto. However, she doubted they'd listen to her. They all seemed so fixated on their views of him that they probably didn't care. It kind of reminded her of herself before she met Ino. Up until that point, she had been lonely because everyone would poke fun at her forehead. Only, the adults didn't join in, and it was nowhere near the level that Naruto must have suffered. But Sakura knew what it felt like to be friendless and alone, though she didn't have to watch her back every second of the day. She knew that she probably would never understand the full extent of Naruto's pain and suffering, but she knew enough to know that they were similar. Sakura had her huge forehead and Naruto had, well, Sakura didn't know what, but she knew that it was something that he had no control over, and so she came to a decision. "Naruto-kun," she said as she walked towards him and wrapped her arms round him once she reached him, "I'll be your friend." Naruto's eyes widened in shock and he just stared at her with a look of astonishment and disbelief written all over his face. Why you'll be my FFF friend?" he said, unable to believe what he just heard as Sakura wiped the tears from his eyes and nodded. "Yeah, you're no monster," she said as she placed her hands on his shoulders and looked him right in the eye. "I may be 7 years old, but I know that monsters never cry nor do they feel sadness nor sorrow. You're alone and I know it's not your fault. I can never understand what you've been through, but I understand what it's like to be alone and feel like everyone's against you. Before I met Ino-chan, everyone would make fun of my forehead because it was bigger than normal, and like you said, I didn't ask for it to be like that, so in a small way, we're kinda similar. But the villagers might hurt you and try to kill you as well," Naruto said as he remembered Tuchi and Ayame and what some of their customers said to them after being served. You demon lover, he remembered a man saying to Tucci once he had finished eating, if it wasn't for this stand, you and that whore you call a daughter would be next to that, demon filth. Tucci had just shrugged it off since he was used to it and had learned to ignore such insults. However, hearing those customers talk like that had taught Naruto one thing. That anyone who socializes with him will be in for the same treatment as him, and it was the main reason he felt why the children who had become his temporary friends in the past had sided with their parents. I don't care, Sakura said with a determined look on her face and a hard look in her eyes that told Naruto that her mind would not be changed. You need friends, and even one friend is better than none. If I have to be treated the same as you, so be it. At least I know that everyone's wrong about you. Unbeknownst to Naruto and Sakura, the woman from the 10th of October who had tried to incite hatred in Naruto watched the whole scene from atop a branch on a nearby tree with disapproval in her eyes. Her mood was sour and foul as she heard every word. Using the Kakuramino no Jutsu with a cloak the same color and pattern as the tree, she was able to get close enough to hear without them realizing she was there. 6 months ago, she had hoped to incite Naruto to hate the village so that he'd eventually become as much of a monster as the Kyuubi itself, so that the Hokage and the few who didn't treat him like the plague of the village to turn against him. Unfortunately, much to her fury, the old bastard of a Hokage had managed to steer Naruto from that path with his talk. Oh yes, she had overheard everything that was discussed between Naruto and the Sandaime. The old fool was growing senile in his old age. He had no idea that his office had been bugged, though she had to admit that she couldn't have done it alone and had enlisted help. But those fools were nothing to her other than mere pawns in her scheme to bring down the Kyuubi container, and even if the Sandaime did discover the bug in his office, there was no way they could trace it back to her. The help she had enlisted was from a group of separatists loyal to a man who had been at loggerheads with the Sandaime since the Nidaime was still in power, and the Sandaime was well aware of this separatist faction's existence. The man in charge, a war hawk by the name of Danzo, who was in charge of the Anbu Root Division, which was officially disbanded, but secretly active, would get the blame. Not that she cared for the old one-eyed cripple. He may not be as senile as the Sandaime, but the woman had managed to dig up dirt on him that she could use to further exert her control over him should he discover that he was being used like a puppet. The woman's lips curled into a smile as she thought of the irony of it all. Danzo himself was a puppeteer, using others to further his own ambitions, and yet, he was being used himself to further her own plans. The puppeteer is a puppet himself, she thought with a smirk before coming back to reality and glared down at Naruto. This was not supposed to happen. Naruto was not supposed to turn out like this. In the beginning, she had believed the Sandaime's talk to be a lost cause and believed that Naruto would give in to temptation eventually, even after making his vow never to kill again. After all, he was only human. Unfortunately, she had underestimated his willpower and resolve. He had come close in the past to killing as few people, but always managed to stop himself before the blow connected, and it was causing a few people to rethink their views on him. That didn't worry her though, they still didn't trust him and could easily be brought back into believing that he was the Kyuubi itself. His pranks were very good at that, but this could pose a problem in the future and make her plans more difficult. Sakura could see the truth. The woman could see that, and she knew that all it would take was for one person to accept him and more could follow suit. Like a group of people who feared an enemy they clearly outnumbered, all it would take was for one person to stand up to the enemy and they could all stand up. This was similar, only instead of driving an enemy out, they'd be accepting a lonely, misunderstood boy with open arms. She knew that Sakura was brave and would stand by her pledge despite her apparent lack of confidence without her friend. The fact that Naruto and Sakura shared the experience of being alone due to things they had no control over seemed to have brought them together and increased Sakura's confidence dramatically. Though the woman wouldn't kill Sakura outright. No, she could still push Naruto down the path she wanted him to take, and maybe if she turned Sakura against him, the devastation he would no doubt feel from it would be enough to consume him with hate. He was only human after all, and every human had their limit. Some had greater limits than others. Why kill Sakura when she could be just as useful to her alive? Besides, how could she kill Sakura and get away with it? Her plan had just become more complicated. She was sure that she could still pull it off, but this new factor just made things even more difficult. Damn it, she thought, clenching her fists as she looked up at the sky, even from beyond the grave you're still laughing in my face. Once that annoying brat's taken care of, all traces of you and your legacy will finally be out of my hair, and then, we'll see who's laughing then. Much later, after Sakura said goodbye to Naruto after they spent the day in the park together, she arrived home and immediately removed her sandals from her feet. "Mom, I'm home," she said as she walked into the kitchen to see her mother, Haruno Fuhei, preparing the dinner. "Hello dear, how was your day?" Fuhei asked her daughter as she turned to face her daughter with a huge loving smile on her face. "Fine Ka-chan, just fine," Sakura replied with a fake smile as she remembered that her mother was among those who wrongfully treated Naruto like he was some kind of monster. Everything behind Sakura suddenly went black, and a clone of Sakura that was all black with a white outline tracing her features, even those of her clothes, appeared behind her. Written on this clone's forehead in white kanji letters were the words, "Inner Sakura," and she glared at the woman furiously. "Shanaru, how can you be so happy when Naruto-kun's suffering because of you and the rest of this village?" the inner Sakura said, pointing at Fuhei. Haruno Fuhei was basically a taller, much older version of her daughter as far as her appearance went, though she didn't have a wide forehead like her daughter had. She had long waist-length pink hair and sparkling big jade-green eyes. She currently wore black sandals, red trousers, and a pink shirt with a red apron over the front of her body. "Where were you, by the way?" Fuhei inquired curiously as she gave her daughter a curious stare. "In the park," Sakura answered truthfully as she averted her mother's gaze, causing Fuhei to eye her in surprise. Sakura just couldn't bring herself to look at her mother at the moment. Spending time with Naruto and getting to know the real Naruto and not just what everyone said about him caused Sakura's respect for the village to drop significantly. Adults were supposed to set examples for children. Sakura knew that. However, from what she had learned from her time with Naruto, it seemed that the adults of this village were just teaching their children how to hate. She had always been somewhat smart for her age with an above-average intelligence, though she wouldn't call herself a genius. That kid from the Nara clan was smarter than her despite being lazy and only wanting to just lie back and watch clouds roll by every second of the day. Anyway, she knew that the children only hated Naruto because their parents hated him. The adults were infecting them with their hate, and it sickened her that her mother was among those who partook in such behavior. "What's for dinner?" she asked, still refusing to meet her mother's gaze. Fuhei studied her daughter, looking her over with a thoughtful expression on her face as she tried to figure her out. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked curiously with a hint of concern in her voice. "You don't seem too happy." "I'm fine," Sakura replied, waving off her mother's question as she walked over to the table and took a seat. "So what's for dinner?" "Sakura, what's wrong?" Fuhei asked in a slightly more serious tone with the concern more evident. "Did that Amy girl give you grief again?" "Ka-chan, just drop it. I don't want to talk about it," Sakura said, feeling slightly frustrated at her mother's persistence. Fuhei then became even more concerned for her daughter. She knew fine well that Sakura suffered at the hands of bullies because of her huge forehead, especially that Amy girl who Fuhei knew was the worst of the lot. Fuhei swore that if Amy had done something to hurt her daughter in any way, she'd be having a chat with the purple-haired girl's parents. She knew that Ino stood up for Sakura, but Ino was sick with a nasty cold and couldn't come to Sakura's defense this time. "Sakura, tell me what's wrong. It's that Amy girl, isn't it?" she said as her face twisted with anger, furious at the thought that someone was out to ruin her baby's life just for something she had no control over. "Just leave me alone," Sakura said in a bitter tone, giving her mother a harsh glare. "I don't want to talk about it. Nor do I want to look at you, Shanaru," inner Sakura added, putting in her 2 cents. Fuhei's eyes widened in shock and she took a few steps back, taken aback by her daughter's tone and the look in her eyes directed at her. Fuhei had only one word to describe the look in her daughter's eyes: disgust. Her eyes narrowed as she regained her composure and stared at her daughter, all previous concern gone as she realized there was something else going on. "Okay Sakura, enough's enough. What's really going on?" she said to her daughter in a demanding tone, "and don't give me that look, young lady." Sakura growled as she violently shook her head and she got up and made her way to the doorway, but Fuhei grabbed her wrist and spun her round till their eyes were locked with one another's. "Sakura, you will tell me what's going on here," her mother demanded with a hint of fury lacing her voice. "I am your mother and I don't deserve that kind of treatment from my daughter. What's made you so angry with me?" Her tone became more calm and full of concern as she asked the last question. Sakura just glared up at her mother right in the eye and let out a disgusted scoff. I think you know, she said in a tone of absolute revulsion before shaking her head. Fuhei repeated before trailing off as her anger returned and she glared down at her daughter. Tell me, I'm not sure what you mean. Uzumaki Naruto. Sakura replied as she intensified her glare and her mother's eyes widened and her grip on her wrist slackened somewhat and Sakura violently jerked her arm out of her mother's hand. Fuhei's hands immediately flew up to her open mouth as she gave her daughter a shocked stare. However, once she recovered from her initial shock, her facial expression twisted to one of anger and she glared furiously at her daughter, her eyes oozing out hate and disgust. I thought I told you to stay away from him, she growled in a dangerously low tone. What were you thinking, hanging out with him? He'll only lead you to your death. Says you, Sakura retorted with a furious glare of her own. You're all wrong about him. He saved me from Amy when she was about to beat me up. He saved you from, Fuhei said, sounding genuinely surprised before she shook her head and reasserted her anger. Don't let him fool you. He's just trying to trick you. He probably only did it to gain your trust so he can get close to you and then he'll kill you. You don't understand him, you don't know him, Sakura countered, furiously at hearing her mother's excuses. All he wants is to be accepted and to have friends, but you and the rest of this village deny him that. With good reason, Fuhei snapped loudly, before covering her mouth and her eyes widened in pure shock as she realized that she may have said too much. What reason? Sakura demanded, placing her hands on her hips as if trying to look brave. Even he doesn't know why you all hate him so much. What did he do to deserve that kind of treatment? He was born, Fuhei stated coldly after recovering from her shock. What? Sakura said, shocked and disgusted at her mother's answer. He was born? That's your reason? Not good enough. It's not his fault he was born. Maybe you should hate me because I have a big forehead. That's different. Fuhei snapped in seething fury, furious at her daughter's persistence and also a bit fearful. How's it different? Sakura demanded, folding her arms across her chest. It just is, Fuhei replied simply. Nonsense, Sakura said as she shook her head. Just tell me why everyone hates him so much because I'm not going to abandon him, even if you disown me. I spent time with him and got to know a bit about him and he's sad. Not the demon you all seem to portray him as. Sakura, that's enough, Fuhei said in a furious tone. I can't tell you that. I'm sorry, but I can't, and if you continue to persist in finding out, I'll have no choice but to kill you, and believe me, that's something I don't want to do. Sakura's eyes widened in shock at hearing this. Kill me, she gasped, shooting her mother a look of disbelief. But why? Fuhei closed her eyes as her face took on a pained expression. Because it's something you and the other children are not supposed to know about, she replied with a sigh. I'm not supposed to know about? Sakura said, her face twisting with anger. Why? That's none of your concern, Masumi-chan, Fuhei stated, serious with a look that said, don't argue with me. Sakura glared into her mother's eyes for a few moments before she turned and stormed out the kitchen, leaving Fuhei, who just sighed as she shook her head, feeling depression set in as she slowly walked out of the kitchen and into the living room. She then turned her head to look at the picture of a man with reddish-brown hair and dark bluish-green eyes sitting on top of the mantelpiece at the far right-hand wall of the room. The man also had a wide forehead much like Sakura's. Oh, Masumi-chan, Fuhei thought as she shook her head as a single tear rolled down her cheek. If only I could tell you the truth. If only I could tell you how that thing killed your father. She continued to stare at the picture of the man who was wearing a dark blue jumpsuit with a green vest over it, and on each side of the vest zipper was 3 compartments shaped as if they were pouches. He wore a dark blue hite-8 round his neck as if it was a choker. He had his arms folded across his stomach with a looking grin on his face. Takeshi-kun, just what would you have done? Fuhei thought, looking at the picture of her late husband. She wished she could tell her daughter the truth about Naruto, she really did, but unfortunately due to the Sandame's decree, she couldn't. She wanted nothing more than to be honest with her daughter, but unfortunately she couldn't, and she also feared that if Sakura dabbled in that subject, the Sandame might order that Sakura be silenced if she discovered too much, for fear that she might tell the other children. The Sandame's decree never really covered the possibility that the children could become persistent in wanting to know why their parents felt the way they did about Naruto, and Fuhei herself feared the Sandame would order any children who were persistent to be eliminated to keep the truth from the younger generation. She knew the Sandame's personality well and knew that he would probably not want to have such barbaric acts carried out, but unfortunately there were times when certain situations called for people to do things that would make everyone tremble in fear. It was something that the ninjas had to live with, and the Hokage was a ninja himself. Fuhei found the decree rather foolish. It was supposed to give Naruto a chance at a normal life with the children, but the older generation easily found ways round that and were able to convince their children to side with them without really telling the truth, since children normally followed their parents' example blindly and without question. However, Sakura had started questioning her about it, and unlike the other children, Sakura was more open-minded, and to Fuhei's horror, she had actually spent time with Naruto and she was convinced that he was a sad and lonely boy. Remembering Sakura's words caused the elder Haruno to snort. What did Sakura know? If only she knew the truth, she probably wouldn't be so quick to take his side. In Fuhai's mind, the demon was brainwashing her daughter, corrupting her very soul. She remembered Sakura mentioning about how she wouldn't change her mind even if she was disowned, and that was something Fuhei could never bring herself to do no matter what. She had lost her husband to the Kyuubi and she couldn't bear the thought of being alone. Sakura was all she had left and she was going to fight to keep her, though for now, she'd just let Sakura have her way. Let her find out the hard way and she'd step in if her daughter was in danger. An evil grin suddenly appeared on her face. Sometimes people were so stubborn that they'd only change their mind through witnessing the person they were arguing with being proven right. I just hope it doesn't cost you your life, my little Masumi-chan, she thought as her grin faltered as the fear that being proven right would cost her daughter her life. Please be safe, Sakura. She then left the room and an astral form of her husband's face appeared in front of his picture and only frowned as if he were disappointed about his wife's behavior.
That's all for now. If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comments.